My name is Emily. I am 28 years old. I work as a freelance graphic designer and I live alone in a small apartment in Maple Grove, Minnesota. I moved here 3 years ago, looking for a quiet space away from the chaos of the family home. My apartment is nothing spectacular, but it has a bright room, a desk where I spend most of my time, and a window with a view of the building opposite, which is identical to mine. I have always enjoyed looking out of that window and seeing my neighbors hanging clothes on their balconies or simply smoking a cigarette. These insignificant, mundane moments comfort me and make me feel less alone on long days at work. However, a few weeks ago, that window stopped being a relief and became the beginning of a concern that I still haven't managed to fully explain. The apartment in front of mine, which had been empty for months, was finally occupied. I noticed it because of the noises of furniture being dragged, boxes falling, and the occasional slamming of a door. When I looked out of curiosity, I saw a thin, short man carrying a heavy box. He wore a dark sweatshirt with the hood up, and his jeans were so worn that they almost looked torn. Something in the way he nervously moved caught my attention, but I didn't give it much importance. Since that day, I have seen him several times. I don't know his name or his exact age, but I estimate that he is around 30 or so. In the first weeks, he seemed like an ordinary neighbor. Sometimes I found him looking out the window while I was hanging up my clothes, and he would greet me with a slight nod that he never accompanied with a smile. I returned the greeting and went back to what I was doing without thinking too much about it. But little by little, his appearances began to become more frequent at any time of the day. When I looked up, I found him standing there next to his window. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but I soon realized that his behavior was not normal. His gaze was not one of simple neighborly curiosity. It was persistent and always directed at me. First, I tried to ignore it. I didn't want to sound paranoid or give it more importance than necessary. Living in a city like this forces you to develop a kind of tolerance for strange behavior. Maybe he is shy, I told myself, or maybe he is new in town and doesn't know how to interact with the neighbors. I didn't think much more of it, but as the days passed, my discomfort grew. No matter what time I showed up, he was there. If I hung clothes on my small balcony, he appeared at his window. If I sat down to work with my laptop next to the glass, I felt his eyes on me. Once, I even thought I saw him writing something down in a notebook while I watered my plants. I swallowed and forced myself to look away. The nights were worse. Before, I liked to leave the curtains open to enjoy the light of the park and the illuminated windows of the other buildings. But now that feeling of being watched forced me to close them as soon as the sun went down. However, even with the curtains drawn, I couldn't shake the idea that he was still there on the other side of the glass. One afternoon, I decided to face my discomfort, and I greeted him more firmly. I was on my balcony, and he was at his window as usual. I raised my hand and forced a smile. "Hi, are you new here?" I asked out loud, trying to sound casual. For a second, it looked like he wasn't going to answer. Then he nodded slowly, but he didn't say anything. He just looked at me with an intensity that made me feel small, vulnerable. "Everything is fine," I added, nervous about the silence. He finally spoke. Although his voice was more of a murmur than a greeting, he said, "Everything is fine. You are very consistent with your routine. It is interesting." Something in his tone made me take a step back. Steady pace with my routine, I thought. I didn't know if it was a compliment or a warning, but something wasn't right. "Well, welcome to the building," I responded, trying hard to stay calm. I went back inside my apartment and closed the balcony door behind me. That night, while I was checking my email on my computer, my cell phone vibrated with a notification. It was a friend request on my social networks. When I opened it, I froze. It was him, The profile photo showed his face with the same neutral expression that I saw every day from the window. The name on his profile didn't tell me anything. He had clearly looked for mine first. My breathing accelerated. I don't remember giving him my name or having exchanged more than a couple of words with him. I rejected the request immediately and turned off my cell phone. However, the anxiety had already set in as I realized he knew more about me than I thought. That night, I barely slept. I dreamed of windows that wouldn't close and eyes that followed me even when I turned off the lights. Waking up with my heart pounding in my temples, I swore to stay alert, but I couldn't shake the idea that something more was to come. The next few days were tense. Trying to ignore my neighbor became a constant battle between my need for normalcy and the fear that grew inside me. I closed the curtains almost all day, although I hated feeling locked in. I stopped going out on the balcony, and I even avoided looking toward his window, but I couldn't avoid the feeling that his gaze was still on me, passing through the walls. One night, while I was working on a project, the sound of a knock on my door made me jump. It was almost 10 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, and in my building, it was not common for neighbors to visit each other. I approached cautiously, trying not to make noise, and I looked through the peephole. It was empty. I waited a few seconds, holding my breath. Maybe it had been a mistake, an accidental knock, I told myself, but just as I was moving away, another knock sounded, stronger this time, accompanied by a dragging sound, as if something was scratching the wood. I looked again, but the peephole only showed me the empty hallway. I didn't dare open the door. With my hands trembling, I returned to the living room and checked that all the windows were closed. Something was wrong. I called a friend, Sarah, trying not to sound too paranoid. "Do you think I should report it to someone?" I asked after telling her about the knock. "To whom?" I responded, frustrated. There wasn't even anyone. It could be anything or anyone. Sarah insisted that I stay at her house that night, but I rejected the offer. I was ashamed to admit that something so simple was affecting me so much. After all, there was no real evidence that I was in danger, right? That morning, I woke up with a start. At first, I didn't understand what had brought me out of sleep. Everything was silent, but the air in the apartment felt strangely heavy. I turned on the lamp on the table, and when I turned my head toward the window, I saw something that made me freeze. My neighbor was there at his window, completely dark. Although his apartment had no lights on, I could make out his figure staring at me motionless, as if he had been waiting for me to wake up. I felt a knot in my stomach. How long had he been there? I looked down, trying to ignore him, but something caught my attention in the corner of the glass in my window. There was something written with a marker, 2 words, "Good night." Panic invaded me. I had not left that message. Someone had entered while I was sleeping. I ran to check the lock on the front door. It was still intact. I tried to think logically, but my mind was full of terrifying images. The possibility that my neighbor had broken in made my stomach turn. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my living room with all the lights on and my phone in my hand, ready to call the police. In the morning, when daylight began to seep in, I got up to erase the words from my window, but they were gone. The glass was clean, as if they had never existed. From that moment, my fear became a certainty. I was not safe in my own home. That morning, I was unable to stay in the apartment. I took my computer, a change of clothes, and some essentials, and I went to the nearest cafe. I wrote to Sarah, and between coffees and nervous glances at the door, I told her everything that had happened. She was worried and insisted that I call the police, but I was doubtful. I had no evidence, just intuitions and a fear that clung to my chest like a dead weight. As the afternoon fell, Sarah accompanied me back to the apartment. I stood in front of the door for several minutes, unable to open it. My friend did it for me, and when I entered, everything seemed to be in order. Nothing out of place, no trace of anyone else in the space. However, the feeling of oppression was still there. "I don't want to leave you alone tonight," said Sarah, crossing her arms as if she wouldn't take no for an answer. "Okay," I responded, relieved. Maybe her presence would help me feel better. Somewhat calm, we spent the night in the living room, watching movies and talking about nonsense to distract ourselves. But around 1 in the morning, a dry sound broke the tranquility coming from my window. We both turned around at the same time. The neighbor was there, not in his window as always, but in mine. A chill ran through my body. His face was pressed against the glass, barely illuminated by the streetlights on my street. Sarah was paralyzed, but I reacted. I jumped up and screamed, "Get out of here! I'm going to call the police." He didn't move. His eyes were fixed on me as if he couldn't hear me. Then I noticed something that made me recoil. In his hand, he was holding something, a knife. It was a small kitchen knife, but it shone under the light, reminding me of how vulnerable I was. "Sarah," I yelled, who was shaking as she took out her phone. I ran to the front door to make sure it was locked. But when I turned the handle, I found something worse. The lock was broken. "It can't be," I murmured to no avail. A sharp knock on the window made me turn around. He was knocking on the glass slowly, but with enough force to make his message clear. He had no intention of leaving. He seemed to enjoy the fear he caused us. Sarah managed to call emergency services and barely had time to explain the basics before the glass began to splinter. My neighbor hit the handle of the knife over and over again, his expression completely unhinged. The minutes felt like hours while we waited for help to arrive. Then the glass hit and he stuck his arm in, trying to reach the latch. Sarah and I backed away, looking for something to defend ourselves in the corner of the room. I found a heavy lamp, grabbed it with both hands, and prepared myself for the worst. "Get away!" I shouted, feeling the sweat running down my forehead. But before I could fully enter, the sirens of the police broke the silence. The blue flashes illuminated the window, and he stopped his movements for a moment. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation. Then he withdrew his arm and ran. The officers arrived seconds later, bursting into the apartment while Sarah and I tried to explain what had happened. They searched the entire building but did not find him. His apartment was empty, with stacked boxes and just some basic furniture. However, on the wall next to his window, they found something that made my blood run cold. A collection of photographs of me, all taken from his window. I was working on some projects in the other room, and there was even one where I was sleeping, taken through the glass of my balcony. That night, I did not sleep in my apartment again, nor in the following days did I remain there. Shortly after, I left behind everything I could not carry with me. Sarah helped me pack. Although she tried to encourage me, my paranoia grew more every day. My neighbor was still at large, and the police had no clues about his whereabouts. The last time I spoke with them, they mentioned that the name under which he had rented the apartment was false. He had no history in any database. Now I live in another, smaller, more expensive but safer place. However, the fear has not gone away. Every time I sit in front of a window, I wonder if he is there watching me from some dark corner, waiting for the moment to return. Last night, I found an envelope under my door. I didn't recognize the sender, but when I opened it, I knew it was him. Inside, there was a photograph of me taken from a distance. On the back, in familiar handwriting, it only said, "I found you." If you are enjoying the stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. My name is Chloe. I am 22 years old, and I work as an assistant in a marketing company. My life has always been an organized chaos. I run from one side to another with pending meetings and endless lists of things to do that I never finish. But if I'm honest, I'm terrible at organizing myself. I always forget things. My keys, important dates, even basic tasks like paying for gas. That's why, when I saw an ad on my cell phone that promised to solve all my problems with a simple click, I didn't think too much about it. Organize your life with precision. Never forget anything. It said in big, bold letters. The app was called Perfect Assistant, and at that moment it seemed like exactly what I needed. The download was quick and free. Configuring it didn't take long either. I entered my schedules, important dates, and even some goals that I wanted to accomplish during the month. The interface was clean and friendly, just what I needed to not feel overwhelmed. During the first week, the app seemed to do what it promised. It reminded me of meetings, told me when to drink water or rest, and even suggested faster routes to get to work. Why didn't I do this before? I thought until something strange happened. One day, while I was checking my emails at the office, I received a notification from the app. Don't forget to go to the dry cleaners after work. I froze. I didn't remember telling the app that I needed to go to the dry cleaners. It was true that I had a dress that I had to pick up, but I hadn't written it down anywhere. I tried to convince myself that I had forgotten or that maybe I had checked it in at some point and didn't remember. But that night, while I was at home, another notification came. Time to make dinner. Something light like chicken salad. It was exactly what I had been thinking about cooking. I hadn't planned it. I hadn't even opened the refrigerator. I still felt a chill, but I told myself they were coincidences, harmless coincidences, or at least that's what I thought. The next day, I began to pay more attention to the app's notifications. I repeated to myself that it was probably just an advanced artificial intelligence designed to learn from my routines. However, as the hours passed, the precision with which it anticipated my actions became impossible to ignore. At 10 in the morning, while I was in the office, I received a notification. It's time to have coffee with a pinch of sugar. As you like. I didn't have any reminder for that moment, but the notification appeared just when I thought about getting up to prepare some. Later, when leaving the office, the app suggested, take the secondary street. Your usual route is heavy with traffic. I quickly checked Google Maps out of curiosity, and sure enough, my usual route was congested. That night, when I got home, I felt a discomfort that I had not felt before. My phone, which had always been my support tool, now seemed like an intruder. I sat on the couch, determined to investigate. I checked the app's permissions and didn't find anything out of the ordinary. Access to my location, calendar, contacts, and physical activity. Everything standard, everything normal. But it was just an app. How could it know things I had not written down? That morning, I woke up startled. My phone was vibrating insistently. I unlocked it and saw a new notification. You should close the window. It's cold outside. The message left me cold. I live alone, and although my window was open, I had not mentioned it or written it down anywhere. I looked into the living room. There was the window wide open. Closing it took more effort than it should have. My hands were shaking. How did the app know? That night, I didn't sleep well. Every little sound in the building made me raise my head. Every time I looked at my phone, I felt like I was being watched. In the morning, I woke up to another notification. Don't forget to put on the red coat. It will be cold later. The coat was on my couch, where I had left it when I arrived the night before. The message wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. The app was crossing limits that I had not allowed. It was days before I dared to talk to someone about what was happening. First, I called Sarah, my best friend. While I was telling her, her response was logical, almost too logical. It's just an algorithm. Apps do that. They listen to your conversations, they review your searches, things like that. You're paranoid, she said. I wanted to believe her, but there was something that didn't add up. I had never looked for or talked about many of the things that the app knew. However, I didn't want to sound exaggerated, so I pretended to calm myself down. The real blow came one afternoon at work. I was about to close my computer when I received a new notification. Don't forget about the file in the bottom left drawer. It was a project that had been requested of me hours ago, but I had never mentioned it or written it down anywhere. I opened the drawer, and sure enough, it was there. No clue how I had missed it. Not even my boss knew. I left my phone on the desk, feeling my chest tighten. That night, I convinced myself that I needed to uninstall the app. I looked for the option on my cell phone, but it didn't appear in the list of applications. I checked the storage settings, nothing. I tried to restart the phone, and the first thing I saw when I turned it on was another notification. Why do you want to uninstall? I'm here to help you. The message took my breath away. It was personalized, as if someone was speaking directly to me. I slammed it shut and threw the phone in a drawer, ready not to play with it again for the rest of the night. However, things didn't end there. In the following days, the app began to invade every aspect of my life. I knew when I left the house, when I returned, and even things as trivial as the exact moment I was getting ready to make coffee. But the most disturbing thing came on a Sunday morning when I woke up to a new message. Don't forget to smile at the man in the blue shirt at the corner cafe. I went to the cafe later, trying to convince myself that it was nothing more than a coincidence. And then I saw him. A man with short hair and a blue shirt, an ordinary appearance who looked at me for a second but did not speak to me. I left there as quickly as I could, with goosebumps and the feeling that my life was no longer mine alone. That afternoon, I called the police, but when I dialed the line, it went silent. There wasn't even a ringtone, just static noise. Then my phone vibrated. A message appeared on the screen. That's not necessary, Chloe. Everything is under control. I closed the door to my apartment and locked it, seeking refuge in my own thoughts. But I no longer felt safe in my own house. Who was behind this? And even worse, how far did they plan to go? That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go directly to a technician to check my phone. I didn't care how much it cost. I wanted answers. I put the cell phone in my bag and left the house. I took a taxi to a service center that I had searched for online. The driver was an older and quiet man. As we drove, I checked my bag to make sure I had the charger and phone. However, when I took out the device, I found a new notification. Don't try to run away. I felt the blood drain from my face. I was frozen. I had barely left the house. I looked around the taxi, searching for anything that would indicate that someone else was involved, but the driver was still focused on the road. I leaned forward and asked him to speed up. Minutes later, the cell phone vibrated again. You won't get to where you think. I was shaking. I tried to turn it off, but the screen didn't respond. The phone was still on, showing my location in real time. Suddenly, the taxi turned onto a secondary street. Why did we change routes? I asked, trying to sound calm. The driver turned to me with a confused expression. You didn't ask me to take this street. No, I didn't. My cell phone vibrated again. It's easier if you don't fight. I asked the driver to stop immediately. I got out of the taxi as soon as it stopped and ran to a nearby cafe, looking for a public place where I could feel safe. I sat in a corner and tried to compose myself. I was sweating. My heart was beating so hard I could barely think. I decided I couldn't trust that phone anymore. I left it on the table, feeling like I had gained a little control, until a last notification appeared on the screen. Now we are face to face. I looked toward the entrance of the cafe. A man was standing there. It was the same one from the cafe in the blue shirt. He smiled at me, but it was not a friendly smile. It was a smile that said he was in control. Without thinking, I grabbed my bag and ran toward the back exit. I heard his footsteps behind me, accelerating. I went out into a dark alley and felt my legs trembling. I couldn't think. I couldn't reason. I turned towards the main street, trying to lose him, but his shadow was still behind me. I finally stopped. My strength abandoned me. I turned around and saw him advancing calmly as if he knew he had me trapped. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice broken by fear. He stopped a few steps from me, took a phone out of his pocket, and raised it to show me the screen. It was my profile in the app. "I just want to help you, Chloe, as I have always done." My knees buckled, and I fell to the ground. I had no way out. He advanced toward me while my breathing became more and more labored. I tried to back away, but my back hit a wall. My eyes searched desperately for an exit, but the street was deserted. No one was going to come. "I did all this for you so that your life would be perfect." His voice was low, slow, but charged with a terrifying calm. I felt an icy weight on my chest. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. My vision blurred as he extended a hand toward my face. "Trust me." The last sound I heard was the vibration of a phone. My name is Ashley. I'm 27 years old, and I work as a community manager at a small agency. Somewhat ironic considering how much the social networks overwhelm me. I like to maintain my life private outside the internet. My profiles are minimal, just a couple of photos, a generic description, and almost no publications. I prefer to stay out of it. It all started with a message on my Instagram account. It was from a profile that I did not recognize, with a name, Forgotten Memories. The message said, "Ashley, it was beautiful to see you at the fair last weekend. I loved the red blouse you were wearing." When I read it, a mixture of confusion and strangeness invaded me. I had not been to any fair recently, nor do I have a red blouse. I responded with a dry, "I think you have the wrong person." Instead of apologizing, the profile responded to me almost instantly, "It's not a mistake. Maybe you don't remember, but we shared a very special moment. Do you still like cotton candy?" The message made me grip the phone tightly. It was true that when I was a child, I loved cotton candy, but that was not information I had shared on the internet or even in conversations with close friends. I tried to ignore it. I blocked the profile and continued with my day, but the discomfort lingered, floating in the air like a shadow. That night, I checked my profile. It had not been updated with recent photos or content that could give clues to my current life. However, I couldn't get out of my head the feeling that someone was watching. The next morning, I woke up to a new message, this time on Facebook, from the same username, Forgotten Memories. The text said, "The last time we spoke, it was at the coffee shop on the corner where you always ordered coffee with milk and a blueberry muffin. You still go there in the afternoons?" My heart skipped a beat. There was a detail that I couldn't ignore. Until a few months ago, I went to that coffee shop almost every day. How could they know that? I decided not to respond to the message. I told myself it was better to ignore it, block the profile, and move on. But something inside me couldn't let it go. Who was this person? How did he know so much about me? I checked my social media posts once again, looking for any clues, but there was nothing recent about that cafe. Not even photos from Friday night at the fair or any cotton candy. That same afternoon, I received another message. "You should close the curtains better. I like how your lamp looks on at night. My lamp was unique, a strange design that I found in a market years ago. But it wasn't just that. The message implied that this person could see my apartment from outside. I got up immediately and ran to the window to close the curtains, trying to calm down while I looked through the cracks. The street was empty, just a couple of parked cars and a lady walking her dog. That night, I felt like a mouse trapped in a glass box. I couldn't concentrate on anything, not even my work. Every time I heard a noise, no matter how small, my mind raced towards that account, towards those messages. Was it someone close to me? An acquaintance from work? A neighbor? The next day, I tried to maintain my routine. I went to work, ignored the notifications on my phone, and focused on pending projects. But when I opened my personal email, I found a message with the subject, "I thought you would like this memory." The sender had no name, just a strange symbol inside. There was a photo of me from years ago, in a park wearing the blouse I had worn on my 20th birthday. The most disturbing thing was that it wasn't a photo that I recognized. It had not been taken by my family or friends. I was alone, walking with a carefree expression on my face. My skin crawled. That photo couldn't exist. There was no one with me that day, and yet here it was in my inbox. I left the office early, with my phone off and a feeling of paranoia that followed me like a shadow. I didn't know who to turn to. My friends would think I was exaggerating, and the police probably wouldn't do anything about a few simple messages. But this was more than that. Someone was playing with me. Someone who had been present in my life long before I noticed. When I got home, the first thing I did was check every corner of the apartment. I closed the windows, checked under the bed, and even inside the closets. Nothing. Everything was as usual, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, while I was trying to sleep, the phone vibrated with a new message. "Good night, Ashley. You still dream of traveling to Paris one day. You still have that postcard on your desk." I didn't get up immediately. The postcard was there on my desk, right where it had always been. After that message, sleep stopped being an option. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my desk at that postcard that seemed to have been there forever. It was a postcard I had bought years ago during a book fair, and I used it as a reminder of my dream to travel to Paris. But what mattered was that I had never mentioned to anyone what it meant to me. The next morning, I decided to call Sarah, my best friend. Among the dull ones, I told her about all the messages, the photos, and the personal references. Her reaction was as expected. "You have to go to the police, Ashley. This is no longer normal," she told me in a firm but worried tone. "And what can I tell them? That an anonymous profile knows things about me? They aren't going to do anything, Sarah. So at least stay at my house for a few days. I don't like that you are alone." I reluctantly agreed, but before I could pack some clothes, my phone vibrated again. A notification, this time from WhatsApp. It was a message from an unknown number. "You don't need to go. I'm not as far away as you think." I felt out of breath. I looked out the window, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The curtains were still closed, and the street was as quiet as always. I blocked the number immediately, but fear had already settled in my chest. I decided to turn off the phone and leave the house. While I was waiting for the taxi, I felt someone's gaze on me. I looked to the other side of the street and saw a man sitting in a car. He wasn't doing anything, just looking in my direction. I got into the taxi with my heart hammering in my ears. That night, already installed at Sarah's house, I tried to convince myself that everything was under control. She tried to distract me with a movie and some wine, but my mind didn't stop wandering. At some point, I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, I found my phone on the table. "You turned it on?" I asked Sarah, with a knot in my stomach. "No, I haven't even touched it," she responded, raising her hands as if to prove her innocence. I approached cautiously and saw the illuminated screen. There was a new photo. It was a capture of the room where we were sitting, taken from outside through the window. The panic was instantaneous. Sarah ran to close the curtains while I checked the doors, feeling as if the walls were shrinking around us. Someone is close, I thought. Someone who isn't going to stop. This is too much. We have to call the police now, Sarah insisted, tears in her eyes. But before I could answer, my phone vibrated again. I opened it with trembling hands. The message said, "Run. If you want, I'm already inside." My legs froze when I read those words. I'm already inside. Sarah and I looked at each other, terrified. She ran to the front door to make sure it was locked while I, trembling, took a knife from the kitchen. It didn't make sense. No one had entered, or had they? "Are you sure you locked everything when you arrived?" I whispered, trying not to let my voice betray my panic. "Of course," she responded, frantically checking the windows and the back door. But I knew it didn't matter. Whoever it was one step ahead of us. The phone vibrated again. I opened it with trembling hands, and this time there was a photo. This time it was closer. Sarah and I appeared together in the living room as if it had been taken from the doorframe. My entire body tensed, and a cold sweat ran down me. I turned my back to the door of the hallway that led to the rest of the house. It was ajar. "Someone is here," I whispered. Sarah stopped moving, looking at me with wide eyes. We both retreated toward the kitchen, looking for something to defend ourselves with. I tried to call the police, but the phone dialed a no service that felt like a mockery. The minutes passed with an exasperating slowness, and every little noise in the house felt like a scream in my ears. Suddenly, a creak came from the hallway, a sound dry as if someone had stepped on a loose board. We turned at the same time and saw the shadow, a tall figure standing still in the doorway. "Who are you?" I shouted, trying to sound louder than I felt. There was no answer, only silence. The figure took a step toward us, and then I saw him. He was wearing a black mask that covered his entire face. His hands were empty, but his presence was more terrifying than any weapon. Sarah let out a scream and ran toward the back door. I tried to follow her, but I tripped over a chair and fell to the ground, losing the knife in the process. He advanced quickly toward me, and at that moment, all I could do was kick towards his legs as I tried to get away from him. "Help!" I screamed, hoping that someone could hear me, but the house was completely isolated. Sarah returned with a wooden stick that she had found in the laundry and hit him with all her strength on the back. He staggered but did not fall. Instead of running away, he simply turned toward her, as if he knew she had everything under control. At that moment, I saw my chance. I got up as best I could and ran toward the front door. I threw it open and ran out into the street, screaming for help. Sarah followed me a few seconds later, tears streaming down her face. When the police finally arrived, the man had disappeared. There were no signs that anyone had entered, no footprints or anything. Just the messages on my phone, the photos, and the fear that now felt like a permanent mark on my skin. That night, I didn't return home. Sarah and I went to the police station where I tried to explain what had happened. But the more I talked, the more absurd the story sounded. An anonymous profile, personal messages, disturbing photos, and a figure that had disappeared without a trace. The officers took notes, but their looks told me everything. They couldn't do much more than offer me a patrol to monitor the area. "If anything happens again, call us immediately," they told me before letting us go. Sarah insisted that I stay at her house, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I accepted out of pure inertia. I spent the hours searching for something to explain how it all started. I tried to trace the outline of forgotten memories, but it had disappeared and didn't exist. Around 3 in the morning, I received an email. The sender had no name, but the subject said, "I thought you would like this." I opened the message with my heart in my fist. Inside, there was an attached file, a video. I played it with trembling hands. It was me in my room, recorded from the frame of the door while I was sleeping. The recording moved gently as if someone was walking toward my bed. At the end, the camera focused on my face, stopping as I lay there in a deep sleep. I felt my stomach turn. The sheet I was wearing in the video was the same one I had covered myself with the night before it all started. I ran to Sarah, who was sleeping on the couch, and woke her up by shaking her. But before she could say anything, her phone started to vibrate. She took it with a frown and checked the screen. Her expression changed instantly. "Ashley, they sent me a photo of us in the living room." Now my blood froze. We left the house without looking back, running to the street, looking for somewhere safe. We found an open gas station and stayed there, surrounded by bright lights and security cameras. That was the last time I tried to face it. We never came home that night, and I never received messages from forgotten memories again. But my life changed forever. Now, every time I leave the house, I feel like someone is watching me. Every time I close a door, I doubt if it is really safe. And when I am alone in the darkness, I can't help but look towards the door frame, hoping to find a shadow that moves stealthily, ready to remind me that I am never alone.